Hi everyone, happy almost New Year and almost 2026. Today I'm excited to share my 2025 reading wrap up and my top 10 favorite books of this year. I had a really good reading year. I read 69 books, as you can see from this little counter that my mom got me for Christmas. Thanks, Mom. And maybe I will finish 70. I still have a few days left of the year. I'm reading Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez right now, so I do hope to finish it, but I only have a few days left, so we'll see. But I figured I might not finish, so I might as well just film my wrap up now. Yeah, I've read a lot of really great books this year. It was hard for me to pick 10, honestly, that stood out the most, but I was able to narrow it down. But before I get to those books, I wanted to talk a little bit about some trends I noticed in my reading this year. So I like to keep track of things like the genre that I read and the country that the author is from, and when the books were published for all the books that I read every year. So I thought it would be fun to compare some things from 2025 and 2024. So this year, the main differences that I noticed in the genres of my reading was that I read a lot more sci-fi this year than I did last year. About 10% of my reading was sci-fi compared to 6% last year. And I read, my biggest genre that I read from was literary fiction, both this year and last year. And my second biggest, both this year and last year, was memoir and essays, followed by mystery, thriller, and horror. So those were my top three genres both years. And then I also read some historical fiction, some short stories, and some YA, and general nonfiction as well. So that was interesting. I kind of kept up with similar trends, but I did read a little bit more sci-fi this year, which I have been enjoying reading. The other thing that I noticed was that this year I read a little over 50% of my reading was from US authors, which I was a little bit disappointed about because I'm trying to read more from different countries, and last year I read only 45% from US authors. So I did a bit of a better job last year of diversifying my reading, even though that was a goal of mine this year. So I do want to keep that number under 50% next year. That's gonna be a big goal of mine. And then for when the books were published, this year I read about a third of my books from the 2020s, a third of my books from the 2010s, and then the rest were from earlier. So that was pretty consistent with my reading last year as well. About 40% from the 2020s, 25% from the 2010s, and the rest from earlier. So I've noticed, based on the books that I've been enjoying, you might notice in my top 10 books, when I share those, that I do enjoy a lot of books that are like the trending books currently being published, but I also enjoy reading classics or just books that maybe were published a few decades ago. And so I want to try to next year read more books from published before 2010. So we'll see. I might try to keep my percentage of books published 2010 or later, about half or less of my reading. I think that might be a good goal for me next year. So that was kind of my overall reading trends of 2025. And now I will get into my top 10 books from the year. So I have my little list here. I actually don't own most of these books. I borrow a lot of books from the library and things like that. I actually have only one here with me to show you, but I'll put up a picture on the screen for each of them. And this is not in the order of like best to worst or worst to best. It's just in the order that I read them. Because I think I would have, well, I'll share what I think is my top book of the year, but it would be hard to rank all of these. So I'm just going to share them in the order that I read them. So the first book that's on my favorites list is The True Deceiver by Tove Jansson. I've shared about this book before. It was one of the first books that I read last year, maybe the first book that I read this year. And it's about a young woman and an older woman, and they live in the same town. And it's winter time, and the younger woman is trying to deceive the older rich woman to try to get access to her house and sneak in there. So it was very good. It was kind of like a dark, wintry atmosphere, which I really enjoyed reading at the beginning of the year. My next favorite book was The Message by Ta-Nehisi, which I've also talked about in my other videos before. This is a memoir in 3 parts, and it's about his travels and how they relate to writing. He travels to the southern US, and then my favorite section of the book was when he travels to Palestine, and he really talks about the Israeli occupation of Palestine and how that connects to his writing and his understanding of social justice in the United States as well. So that was an excellent read, I think, for anybody who wants to understand that situation better. And it was a great reflection of him and how he's grown in his own perspectives on the struggles of other marginalized groups throughout the world. My next favorite book was Nada by Carmen Laforet, and this book is written by a Spanish author, and it's about a young woman who is growing up in the aftermath of, I believe it was the Spanish Civil War. I also read this toward the beginning of the year. And it's just about her and her family, and she has quite the eccentric family, and it's about her, it's kind of her coming of age story. She's in college, and yeah, it was just all the characters in the book were really interesting and funny, but also dark at times, and I just really enjoyed her writing style. The next one that I have, and the only one that I have the actual physical book for, is The Word for World is Forest by Ursula Le Guin. I read 3 of her novels this year, and I chose this one to represent her as an author because this one was my favorite. It's about a group of people who are from Earth, and they go to this new planet where there's an indigenous alien population, and they kind of take over the land and start enslaving those people, and they rise up and rebel against the humans who are who have taken over their planet. And it was just really well written, and it's actually what the movie Avatar is based on, so I thought that was really interesting, and I honestly liked the book better, so I would recommend it. My next favorite is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. This was probably my favorite book that I read this year, if I had to choose one. I really, really enjoyed it. It's about an eccentric old woman who lives in the countryside, and she has only a few neighbors, and she's kind of a loner, but she loves animals, and there's some mysterious, basically she finds a dead animal, and she thinks that one of her neighbors killed this animal, and then some more things start happening. Some people start getting murdered, some more animals, and so it's just a very interesting mystery with an unreliable narrator, and I really enjoyed the book and the main character, even though she's flawed, but she's a very interesting main character. My next favorite, honestly, I read all of those in the winter/early spring, and then the summer I didn't read any favorites, which was interesting. So this next one I didn't read until the fall, and that is Kindred by Octavia Butler, another sci-fi book. This is about a woman who is living in the modern day United States, a Black woman, and she all of a sudden is sent back to the era of slavery in the South in the United States. And it's about her interactions when she gets onto that plantation, and you know, she's not of that time, and it's interesting seeing her grapple as like a modern American woman with what life would have been like for her in the pre-Civil War era, and also how she helps and interacts with other Black people in that time, and also tries to bridge the gap between white people and Black people in the time. But I read a couple books by her this year, and that was my favorite. The next one on my list is Halfbreed by Maria Campbell, and this is a memoir of a Métis woman who, which is a Canadian First Nations group, and she was growing up in the 20th century in Canada, and it's just about her story of her family, and she is half Métis and half white, and so it's just about her experience of being somebody who identifies with both racial groups and how that affects her interactions with her culture and her sense of identity, and then it's just also the story of her life, and it's very beautifully simply written, and I listened to the audiobook and I really enjoyed her narration as well. She had a very just pleasant voice to listen to, and so I definitely recommend the audiobook if you're interested in that book. The next one is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. I also read 2 books by Shirley Jackson this year, and this one was my favorite. This is about 2 sisters who live in this house up on the hill, kind of separate from the rest of the town, and their whole family has died in a tragic accident, and but a lot of the people in the town think that they killed their family, and so everyone is afraid of them and kind of taunts them whenever they have to go into the town. And again, it's another case of an unreliable narrator, which I really like. It's narrated by the younger sister, and it's just interesting to see how things unfold, and the dynamics between the 2 sisters and their uncle, who's the only other one who survived the fire, and then how they interact with the other people in their town. So it's very creepy, but just really interesting characters and extremely well written, as Shirley Jackson is such an amazing writer. The next one I read is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. This book is absolutely horrifying and devastating to read. It definitely was one of the darkest books that I read this year, but it was just really well written. It's about a young boy and his father, and they're in kind of a post-apocalyptic wasteland, and they don't interact with many people, and the people that they do interact with are often pretty dangerous and suspicious characters. So they're just wandering across the United States, just trying to survive, basically, and it's a beautiful story of their relationship as father and son, but also about surviving through dark times, and there is some hope in the story as well, so it's not just dark for the sake of being dark, but I really enjoyed his writing style. It's very it's simple but poetic at the same time, and so I really enjoyed that, even though it was a difficult read as well due to the subject matter. And then the final book that was my favorite for this year is Memorial Days by Geraldine Brooks. I've never read anything by Geraldine Brooks before, but I am so excited to read her novels after reading her memoir. It's about how her husband suddenly died. He was a successful journalist in his 60s in good health, and so it was very shocking for her when he passed, and they were kind of planning their retirement with their kids out of the house together, and that got snatched away out from under her. So it's the story, it goes back and forth in timelines of her when she gets the news and grappling with his death in the immediate, you know, after that happens, but then also she's from Australia, and she goes to this tiny rural island off the coast of Australia a few years after his death to really focus on the grieving process, because that's somewhere that they had spent a couple months together a long time ago, and it was somewhere she always, you know, thought maybe she would move there someday. And I just really enjoyed her writing style. She had beautiful nature descriptions in her writing when she was on the island, and her voice is just really strong and relatable. I feel like she really had deep reflections on her grief and, you know, how her relationships were affected, and how just how she got through that time. I felt like she didn't hold anything back, and yeah, it was a very interesting, quick read, and I'm definitely excited to read some of her novels, hopefully in the coming year. So yes, that is my 2025 reading wrap-up and my top 10 favorite books of 2025. If you notice my this heart that's reflecting my glasses, it's like my light for my camera, which is like a silly light, but it also does work. So if you see that, that's what it is. I mean, I'm sure you will see it, but you know, it's kind of cute, whatever. But please share your favorite books of 2025. I would love some recommendations for next year. I think my next video will probably be any reading plans for 2026, which I don't think I'm gonna have many. I think I'm probably just gonna read whatever I'm in the mood for. And then probably my winter TBR, because I'm excited to read a lot of books this winter. It's like when I read the most. So I think that will be my next video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Happy New Year!